My name is Mercer, and I did a project called Supernatural Entities and the Divinity Divide. My two faculty advisors were Dr. Harmon and Father Guido from the psychology department. So the project was looking at how people differentiate between different types of supernatural entities to kind of look at why some things are considered divine and other things aren't. So we looked at specifically supernatural entities. So they have some type of agentic component and they're supernatural in some way, but only some of them are considered divine. So we specifically looked at God for our divine section, and then we gave participants a list of other non-divine supernatural entities for the other portion. So they had things like witches and ghosts and vampires were all examples of things that could be considered non-divine supernatural entities. What we did for our project was we had participants rate whether or not they thought certain traits were associated with God or with supernatural entities. So each trait was shown twice, and they were asked to rate it on a scale from 1 to 15 of how much they thought it was associated with each type of entity. So they would either first see all the traits associated with God or all the traits associated with the supernatural entities, and then do the other entity once they were done. And then we looked at these traits to see how they were grouped, and we found that for both types of entities, participants had grouped some traits into positive, negative, and supernatural traits. And those type of traits were seen for both entities, which makes sense because most things have positive and negative traits, and then the supernatural we were expecting since they were supernatural entities. The interesting thing was that for the divine entities, we found that there were two additional groups of traits. One was analogical, so things like God is love or God is peace. And the other one was just kind of neutral traits that really didn't fit into being positive, negative, supernatural. They were just kind of your basic everyday traits. Whereas for the supernatural entities, we found two other categories that were only associated with them. So the first group of traits for the supernatural entities that wasn't associated with the divine entities was unusual traits. So those were things that were kind of weird, but not necessarily magical. So odd, unusual, weird would be traits that we had seen in that category. And then the last one that was only seen in this non-divine supernatural entity categories, again, was interpersonal relational ones that were positive. So things like romantic and charismatic and charming would be in that group. And the other interesting thing was that even though there were the three overlapping categories of traits, the positive, the negative, and the supernatural, the specific traits that fell under those categories could be different for both entities. So sometimes you would see one positive trait that was only associated with God, whereas another was only associated with the non-divine supernatural entities.